there are so many seemingly just minor, like I didn't even realize sort of things that people do, that the moment we address those things, they never come back. They never come back. And it's just a matter of someone has to point it out, and then someone has to force you to try to rehearse it out of your routine.
Yeah.
That's it. It's that simple. So when I have a chance to help somebody sort of provide a little more catalyst on their upward trajectory, if I can go, to help them a little more, I love it.
I went through just in a notepad and wrote down a bunch of story ideas of what I would want to share about stories that relate to me around this topic. Stories from clients of mine that will obviously build on, credibility and help people to relate. And then I asked myself some questions about, how did I stop myself from falling into that kind of like life sentence mentality around trauma, and just answered some of those things. And then I just drew up a really like basic hamburger and just did like an idea for like maybe what I could touch on in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. And I thought I just want to talk to you about that today. How do you ever heal from something like that? And my idea was that maybe I begin in that scene, in that red light district, and thinking about what these girls are experiencing. Then I go into a bit about my journey and what took me to Thailand, the work that I was doing around human trafficking advocacy and child abuse awareness, bringing in a bit about my story, about growing up with family violence and having been through trauma myself. And then asking myself the question, like, how did I come out the other side of that trauma? And I wonder if it's possible for other people as well. Then maybe I'm able to go into like finding a way to link that to how I became, obviously a book coach, wrote this book series, and what that taught me about people's ability to heal. What I saw from working with my clients who'd experienced like some of the worst traumas in the world, but the growth that I saw and the healing that I saw in them. So it's bringing it back to like why trauma is not a life sentence, and my credibility at having, assisted dozens of trauma survivors to work through that. And then I guess the end of the hamburger bun is just talking about some of those client healing experiences, reaffirming that trauma doesn't have to be a life sentence, and then talking about coming back to that very first situation in Thailand and bringing it to a close by talking about how after that day, I went to some of those refuge homes and visited the girls who had been rescued and saw the most joyous, looks painted on their faces, and saw them being little girls again and saw them living with purpose. And I visited them, working as cooks and business owners in their local communities, and just seeing that these girls who had been through like the most horrific of circumstances were living with purpose. And that is why I believe that trauma is not a life sentence. So that's a brief idea.
So I'm going to make you repeat some things
Of course.
in the form of this sandwich. Okay. Again, the model that I use, and you know it, and you've you've mentioned that you think about it. I'm just going to say it. I'm going to talk about it again, and because it really helps us funnel things in their specific and appropriate categories, so that you give your audience, particularly in a TED format, you give your audience an easy thing to snack on, right? It's delicious, it's got meaty content, and it's memorable. in the format of a TED Talk, it's even more important that we think about what's the tone we're going to set. What's that first intentional layer you're going to put on there, because that sets up everything. It really does. So let's start there for a second. And by pinpointing what you've learned, it might be a way of helping to pinpoint others how they can do it for themselves, right? Is that the first bite we're getting? Is this the top layer?
Yeah, okay. That's the top layer. Yeah, which then obviously feeds into me helping other people as well, so that they go, oh, it's not just this one person. She's witnessed it in like dozens of people. So
what I want to do is separate the introduction first layer of bread from the content you're going to share. Okay. So if the intro is what we just described, okay, because then you also mention, and let's figure out where this goes. Then you also mention that you want to figure out the best way to transition into who you are today and what you do today, right? Being a book coach, right? Being so that sort of mentor. Do you see that as an introduction piece, or do you see that as a content piece?
That's what I'm struggling with most of my talks.
You don't have to have an answer yet. You don't have to have an answer yet. Not sure.
I think with most of my talks, that is like the center meaty part is like, you know, I do an introduction about basically who I am, and then I go into like my story. Like if I'm talking anywhere else, it's like my story is the meaty part in the middle, and that involves my journey and also the journey to write my book series. And then that funnels down into like the revelations and the transformations and that people have had.
You mentioned when you discuss clients' healing experiences, the joyous looks of children who have been rescued and are living their best life post-trauma. Is that still part of content, or is that more of the bottom bun concluding moment?
I had thought that I would probably share one specific story from a client because it's very powerful in the content meaty section. And it again feeds back to like the beginning.
What is your thought on the conclusion of this? How do you leave your audience?
Yeah.
And you don't have to have the answer, but
no, I did write some.
Trying to put what you've said into these specific lanes.
So I wrote some ideas. So I wondered whether it was a good idea to bring that in somewhere and mention that, and then bring in my case studies from my clients to challenge that thought. Even if it's just like a small mention of, you know, I remember waking up one day and getting this email, and I thought to myself, like, is this person right?
Here's my thought. By the way, all of this is really heavy and very powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. You can't go wrong where you put it, right? You're going to make people listen. And so you don't have anything to worry about there. Okay. People will be listening. You're a storyteller. You can create a character.
Yeah, okay? Exactly.
Right? Okay. It's okay to do that. I think this could be a very powerful start to your presentation. So I think, since this is live, oh, and I should ask, do you have it written out yet? Like, or you're just brainstorming?
I'm just brainstorming at the moment.
Okay, no problem. For the sake of a performance, I think you come out. First of all, I mean, your name will probably be plastered, and like this, you know, like people will know who you are. They'll know. I don't think you have to spend any time introducing yourself, okay, at all.
No.
I think you can start by recreating this moment with this disappointed and angry critic, okay, of your work. And I think you can sort of embellish the character a little bit, create the character, right? You're a writer, so you're allowed to do that. So then I think your audience will appreciate the fact that one, you're a writer and you're already creating a story and a character for your audience. Point of view is a question your audience members might be thinking too, not on a rageful, stalking sort of way, right? But you can give this person some credibility by highlighting the idea that trauma is a tricky, relentless idea. It's a mental health challenge. It's a life-altering circumstance with no one easy fix, okay? And people are at various points in their journey to overcome or manage or work the traumatic experiences into their life so that it doesn't debilitate their lives, okay? I think starting with this person's letter, and you can, for dramatic effect, maybe even pull it out of your pocket. You know, I've been carrying around this letter, right? You could start there. Like, you know, ladies and gentlemen, you know, you take the stage, right? I've been carrying around this letter for 2.5 years. I'd like to read it to you. Read it, right? And this is you're putting on a show because you don't have the letter, right? And who carries around a letter, right? I think you walk to the front of that stage, you reach into your back pocket, take a look at this letter, and I've been carrying around this letter for 2.5 years. I want to read it to you. You read it, okay? There's another element that's added here by showing your audience that this thing matters to you so much that you've had it on you for all this time, okay?
Yeah.
That in itself is a bit of trauma. I can't let this go, right? Sort of a part of me. Sometimes I forget it's there. Sometimes it burns a hole in my pocket, right? So you've created this, audience bites into this unbelievable top layer of bun you've given them, okay? Without saying it, you're telling them who you are as a professional. You're a storyteller. And that you are connected to the issue that you're talking about because you're demonstrating that you understand what trauma is. And you have other ways to show it, not just this letter. Yeah, this was traumatizing. And you have other ways to show it too. But by showing up, highlighting the fact that this thing is burning a hole in your pocket, and reading it and giving it some sense of credibility to challenge you to change your perspective on this thing called trauma, okay, has been a very helpful thing for you, right? Your approach, your tactic. Everyone does it differently, right? No snowflake is the same, right? If you're going to talk about your trauma, this traumatized me. I understand this because I have a connection to this word. This is my experience. This is what happened to me. But I only talk about my experiences because I know that when you tell your story, you can help others tell theirs. That's your bridge into, and that's why I do what I do today. This is the power of storytelling, helping others find their voice, tell their story, and empower themselves to take control over their message, their trajectory. So you've gone from your bun to the way we break the cycle of trauma. And what I've learned is by storytelling. You know, this is what I do for a living. I work with people to help them find their voices, craft their messages, and deliver their stories. And in doing that, it gives them a sense of control and liberation over the pangs that have been weighing them down. The power of story, the power of creativity, the power of resilience. This is where case studies could be helpful, right? And bring it back to the power of stories. The power of stories to heal and emphasize resilience, right? That's your content. Who you are as a professional, the power of stories, recognizing how through what you've seen, case studies, through your work, recognizing these are the practical things that we actually can do to wrestle and overcome our trauma. In concluding it, might be the time to talk about the children. Maybe you highlight, you talked about a little bit in the beginning, right? To talk about where they are today, right? And if there is a storytelling component that helped them find joy and peace in their lives, highlight that too. And leave your audience understanding that that there is hope, that trauma is not a wholly defining life sentence, as you say. Life has many sentences, right? If you're writing your story, okay, it's filled with, you're a writer, it's filled with countless of sentences, right? And you have the power to create the next one and the next one and the next one. Trauma is not a life sentence. Life is too complicated. There's too much life. There's too much life to go for trauma to just put a period on things. Again, you're hinting at, you're a writer. You know these things. That's what you do for a living. And if you were to succumb to this idea, you, the audience, whoever, were to succumb to this idea that trauma is the be all end all of everything, there's nothing left to talk about, I would beg to differ, and I'm sure your audience would too.
I wonder just quickly too, if maybe that's where I could put, if I have a screen behind me, maybe that's where I could have some screenshots of like messages like conversely from that first email, here's like messages I've received from my clients on how storytelling has helped them heal, and just seeing their words about how they don't feel like a victim anymore, and they feel like they have control of their life, and they feel like they have purpose in their life, and maybe showing that so it's like a different visual to the one in the beginning.
Yeah,
Good
absolutely.
position. Yeah.
And you could, that's such a great idea. And what you also could do is, do your audience favor that sees slides all the time, right? Like, obviously try to be as creative as you can with your slides, but you can like maybe even write a story, like a transformative trauma, like post-trauma, pre-trauma, trauma, post-trauma, and like as you're unraveling, the stigma behind trauma, you can be, in your posting of these messages or these stories, you can be putting together a story of your own.
It could even be like, if I've got, for example, just yesterday, one of my clients wrote on my Facebook when I posted about how my new book's coming out, and that includes her story. And she wrote, initially I found this such a confronting process. And she was like, it's really hard. It was really hard, but I'm so glad that I stuck with it. And now I'm so proud, like, of the transformation that's been made. And I'm so excited to see my story out there. And I have lots of, screenshots like that. So even ones like that of people like maybe in the pre-writing stage, or like them reflecting on where they were and then where they are at the end of it. I've definitely got lots of things like that, even if it's like I've rewritten it a little bit and it goes up as a quote instead of like a screenshot. I could easily do stuff like that.
I just think that adds another level of your ability to tell a story, to captivate your audience.
Or I was just thinking, or maybe at the end, I pull out another letter and say, now I'd like to read you another letter that I've been carrying around. And just say, and this right here is why I believe that trauma is not a life sentence.
I think you have a great structure here. So if you're going to start by pulling out the letter and reading, sort of that.
Yeah, and I think that can work. So it does give me a way to tie it to myself, in terms of, not only was she, bringing up some critique that maybe my audience might have, but it allows me to effectively go, well, hey, I kind of get it because I used to be in that headspace. But I think you're right in that it could be a really good introduction, because it's going to bring up any resistance that people have.
Right.
I can create a point of relativity, and then I can bring people through the journey of why I don't believe that's accurate, and then bring out the new letter that kind of rewrites the script on that. So
yeah,
it's a really interesting point. I wouldn't have thought of that. So thank you.
Sure. And you can even, with this initial letter, you can even yes, like, to less dramatize the moment. I've been keeping this in my pocket for 2 years. You can say, how many months you say it's
maybe it's like, I still remember the day that I got this letter 2 years ago, right, or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So the sense of, and, or you can say something to the effect of, for the last 4 months in preparing to be here today, I've been carrying around, I have remembered and been carrying around this letter, right? So whether that's true or not, and whether you want to go there or not, but the letter itself and starting there is a really a wonderful way to introduce this. Yeah, so you have the angry letter, carrying around trauma. I have personal connection to trauma. my personal connection to trauma can help other people face and overcome or manage theirs. And I've learned that the most powerful way to do it is through storytelling. I'm a book coach. The power of storytelling. Here it is in action case studies. You talk about specifically the person who was talking about human resilience. That's the human resilience, right? Well, is that the final letter that you were going to talk about?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can talk about case studies, leaving out the final human resilience letter, right? And then final letter. You can talk about case studies. You can talk about, again, the content part is supposed to be the practical information you can share, right? And then once you've done that, the goal is to lead your audience into a sense that trauma is not what we first heard. It doesn't have to be what this woman, in this letter is telling us. It doesn't have to be the stigma that we all, that it's placed in this insurmountable box, right? Category. It doesn't have to be that. And the proof is, all this content tonight gave you, these practical things to think about, storytelling, book coaching, right? All this stuff, right? These are your moments of practicality to tell your audience, this is what you'll learn from me now. I'm an expert on this. I'm going to tell you, I will teach you these things. And now that we have moved out of the shadow of trauma, we can see how trauma can teach us, about it not being a life sentence, and that there's so much more to write about. There's so many more stories, that trauma is not the end of it, right? It's not the end of it. Case in point, right? Final letter of this remarkable transformation, right? Does that sound like a sandwich you can digest?
That's very interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that sandwich combination. So it gives me lots to play with and think about.